I'm just, as the lady said, this meeting is being recorded. Just for folks who weren't able to attend today, I'm sharing my screen, and hopefully there's always kind of this problem with like when little pop-up boxes pop up, then it makes it hard for, then it blocks things. So hopefully this won't be too much of a problem. But before I even tell you what else is on the agenda, I wanted to tell you that, come on, carry on here. It's our 15-year anniversary. This is our cat party. We're not having an in-person meeting, but if we did, there would be lots of cats and one of them would be a DJ. I'm seriously excited though, because it is the 15-year anniversary of when EMWREP first started. And for those of you who haven't been around since the beginning, it has grown a lot. When the partnership first started, it was 6 original partners that had the initiative and the foresight to work together and pool their resources together. And we now have 25 partners in EMWREP, and as we're going to talk about later in the meeting, we're expanding and thinking about what that might look like as we go northward into the Lower St. Croix Basin. So what's on the agenda? First thing first, I do want to welcome Barbara, and I'll give her a moment to tell you a little bit more about herself. I want to give you just some highlights on what's happened so far in 2021. And then the bulk of the conversation that we want to have today is about what the expansion of the shared education program might look like as we potentially add new partners, as we have EMWREP activities and Lower St. Croix activities kind of happening simultaneously in the same area, what a blended program might look like, and how we make sure that we're continuing to serve all of our program partners. And then of course, for the EMWREP, we have a 3-year contract and we're coming to the end of our 3-year contract cycle. So we need to talk about the next 3-year contract that goes 2022 through 2024. So I'm going to stop sharing and kind of let Barbara introduce herself to all of you. She just started 1 month ago, and I just wanted to give her a chance to tell you a little bit about her background and where she's coming from. We're very happy to have her joining us.
And I'm incredibly happy to be here too. I actually come with a geology background. I have an undergraduate in geology and a master's in water resources science. My passion is river and stream restoration, and I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, but followed a boy here to Minnesota about 10 years ago. And I started at the University of Minnesota at the St. Anthony Falls Laboratory, for any of you who are familiar with that facility and the research that comes out of it. I worked as one of the staff researchers for about 4 years, did some work in the Minnesota River Basin, looking at trying to assess how to lower flows in the streams to minimize erosion. So I do a lot of sediment work. I've had some experience in talking about BMPs in agricultural and rural areas. And then in 2015, I started to transition to the science communicator position at the laboratory as the communication specialist. So really just kind of discovered a passion for science messaging and being able to talk to or manipulate, different types of content. And so it would be relevant to different audiences. And so when I saw this position kind of pop up, I was just like, that really seems like a good melding of a lot of the skills that I've gotten over the last 10 years. So it's been really exciting the last few weeks. Definitely a lot of learning curves. I've had the opportunity to meet some really cool people, participate in a few events, and continuing to get my feet wet, so to speak. But everybody's been awesome, and I'm really excited to work with everybody.
We all love cheesy puns in this business.
I've got some.
Yep. So it's very exciting because Barbara is full-time. You will recall that in the past we've had half-time EMWREP support. And so Barbara right now, half of her position is EMWREP funded and half of her position is funded through the Lower St. Croix Bowser grant that we have. And that means that she is full-time doing education and outreach. So it will be very similar to how I do education and outreach full-time as my entire job. Okay, so let's carry on with, I don't know why these slides are taking such a long time to shift. So let's carry on with some updates from this year's program. And things have continued to be more like last year than like they have ever been before. So we are still continuing to do much more things virtual, just beginning to transition back to doing things in person. And I'll give a little bit more detail to each of these program areas in a moment. But we have had a series of workshops during the spring, all of which were held as webinars. We, of course, are working on expanding into the Lower St. Croix watershed. We have a couple of new master water stewards that are in training right now, are doing public engagement through a variety of ways, in person and online. And I'll talk a little bit about the media communications component in a moment too. And then just continuing to promote a lot of those same programs we've been promoting for years. So Adopt a Storm Drain, Blue Thumb Planting for Clean Water, stormwater pollution prevention and those kinds of things. So the workshops that we have done so far this year, just to give you an idea of where the kind of interest and momentum seems to be this year. Pollinators continue to be something that people are very interested in learning more about. And this pollinator habitat planting workshop that we did back in January, that was co-hosted with the Isaac Walton League of Minnesota. We did a series of 3 pollinator workshops last year, and they were all well attended as well. Shorelines and buffer maintenance. This is a new one that we haven't done as many workshops on in the past, but it's been going over very well this year. In fact, so much so that we had only planned on having 1 workshop, and we ended up having 2 because so many people were interested in learning more about how to care for their shorelines. One of the major benefits I see to having our workshops as webinars is it takes away that barrier of people having to drive to go someplace for a workshop. So whereas in the past, if I held a workshop in Stillwater, people from Forest Lake maybe wouldn't want to drive down to Stillwater to attend. But if we're having it as a webinar, people from Chisago County and Northern Washington County and Ramsey County, this whole kind of region can all attend the same workshop. So that has been a big benefit. Rain gardens are kind of on the, I would say, the downside or downslide in terms of public interest. And it's not that we aren't installing rain gardens, but that's not really what is driving public interest right now. So we had this rain garden design and maintenance workshop. It's actually one of the first we've had in a while. 53 people signed up. I think we actually only had about 35 people that logged on to participate in the workshop. So rain gardens, those were all the rage like 10 years ago. And now people are getting more excited about pollinators and some of those other uses of native plants. So really, we're still installing rain gardens. We're just messaging it differently when we're talking to the public. We did have a shoreline workshop specifically for realtors in May as well, and did that in conjunction with St. Paul Area Association of Realtors, and that was well attended as well. The other thing I want to point out, and I've mentioned it before, is that when we do the workshops via Zoom, we can post the recording online. So we always get an extra bump of people who watch it on YouTube retroactively. So for example, we had, I think, 439 people total that logged on to watch workshops on Zoom, but then another, close to 300 people watched them later on YouTube. So that's a nice bonus as well. In terms of public engagement, like I said, we're kind of easing back into doing things in person and have a series of watershed pop-up events planned during the summer. I've got to be honest that so far these have kind of been a flop, which is a little surprising to me because I was getting the impression that people were really excited to, get back in person and start doing stuff outside in the real world again. And, I'm not sure if it's because people are getting back together with friends and family, and they're not going and doing public events because they're so busy like reconnecting with one another after a year of COVID. But it has been a little surprising to me how poorly the in-person events have been doing so far. So, we're going to kind of look at the ones that are coming up for the rest of the year and think about what adjustments, if any, we can make to, try to make those be more worth our while. And then you have undoubtedly noticed that I have been trying to include MS4 stormwater information in every email that I send out. I've been sending out monthly emails and picking what the topic of the month or topic for the next couple of months could or should be. We have a new MS4 stormwater permit that was approved by the MPCA at the end of last year. And it does have additional requirements above and beyond what the previous permit had, and just more detail, more specific things that they want communities to be educating the public about. So, please feel free to ask me if there's any resources that you want that you haven't been getting from me yet, because all chances are it's probably somewhere on my computer, and just trying to get it out to you when it's a relevant, timely time to use them. And then another thing that is kind of fun to talk about is that we have been really ramping up our social media outreach over the past 2 years because of COVID, because we weren't able to do stuff in person, and using that as a way to be able to interact with the public about topics that we would normally talk to them about for in-person events. So I'm sharing what are some of the most popular posts from our different social media platforms over the past year so far. And for me, it's really kind of a fascinating insight into human psychology, both the fact that we have different kinds of people who follow us on the different platforms, what topics interest people, what gets people excited versus what gets them angry. All of that is just very fascinating to me. So in terms of what have been our most popular posts on Facebook for this past year, there's this one post about salt doesn't melt ice when it's less than 15 degrees. That's one that got a lot of really great traction, organic outreach, meaning I didn't have to pay to put it out there to more people. People were just organically sharing it, and it got out there to a little over 4,000 people. So that, to me, is a really good amount of outreach for just having one small static post. In contrast, I had a boosted post that was about different water resources in Washington County that was kind of a lead up to the fishing opener. And that one I paid $10 to boost it. So it's relatively inexpensive to buy ads on Facebook. And that way you can target it to go to a specific geographical area, or to go to people who are fishermen or people who are boaters, to go to a demographic that you want to see. And you can see it's a comparable amount of people that it ended up going out to, a little over 4,000 people. We're posting a lot of the same content from Facebook also on Instagram, and it's a slightly different audience. The audience is a little bit younger, I would say. So, our average people seeing our posts on Facebook are more like in the 40 to 50 age range, or 40s and 50s. People on Instagram, it's more like the 30s and late 20s through early 40s, in that age group. And then new this year, I've been on TikTok. And so I'm laughing because just recently, for some reason or another, people are really loving on these TikTok videos. And this is the part that's been fascinating to me, because it is going out to a much younger audience, much more culturally diverse, and just like a very different kind of people than we're normally interacting with, my observation. It's definitely very much the general public. So you've got your whole range of people watching these videos, and some of them are knowledgeable about science. Some of them are completely unknowledgeable about science. And, just kind of interesting to see what people are grooving on. So by and far, the most popular video so far has been me pointing out how to ID poison ivy. When I was out on a hike and there was a whole bunch of poison ivy, and I was like, hey, here's poison ivy and here's what it looks like. And this video has now been seen over 4 million times. People are just going bonkers about how to ID poison ivy. So I've discovered that there is an interest out there in just like really basic nature knowledge, really basic science knowledge that not everybody grew up learning. And I have even got some comments on that video, somebody who said, oh, like, thanks, this is really great because as an immigrant, I don't know all the plants in your country. So this is nice to have somebody point out what this looks like. Some of it here, I'm going to move if this is a gray box that's in your way, like, oops, nope, backwards, like it is for me. I'll move it down there. I have been using the videos to highlight cool projects that partners are working on. So this video talking about Ramsey Washington Metro Watershed District's Living Streets project in Maplewood. That one was super popular. It's been watched about 70,000 times. Amazingly, people are really interested in urban planning and how, how streets can be designed to be better. This is very crazy to me. I posted a video last night about porous pavement, and it has been watched 70,000 times since last night at 6 p.m. So who would guess that porous pavement would be so interesting? This is a video about what a dragonfly looks like when it's young, the larval stage when they're still aquatic. This is a video about native gardens and using native plants to increase habitat. So it's interesting conversation. For the most part, they've been getting like really nice reception. One notable exception I think is kind of funny. I had a video about bottled water versus tap water. And oh my gosh, did I get a lot of backlash on that one. It was just a really interesting insight into public perception. People were like, no, tap water is gross. It's full of chemicals. Bottled water is clean. It's spring water. I would never drink tap water. What about Flint, Michigan? So it's just interesting to kind of realize where the public's knowledge and understanding is at versus where our knowledge and understanding is at as water resource professionals. Some of the, the things that we are, so I guess I'll back up. All of the things that I was, sharing, these are like our outputs, what we're doing for education. We're doing webinars, we're doing posts on social media, we're doing events. And then the next step is like, what do we see as a result of that outreach? So one measure that we always use of if our outreach is succeeding is, do people follow up and they schedule a site visit or they apply for a cost share grant? So we're kind of like at an average spot right now compared to previous years. Have had 93 site visits so far for the first 6 months of 2021. And, people looking at a whole variety of projects that they might do on properties, everything from, small residential to agricultural, or in the example in the lower right-hand corner, Andy from our office is talking to a woman who is at a large townhome association on Carver Lake in Woodbury. So they're talking about what could happen on a larger property there. We continue to promote the Adopt a Storm Drain program. And there are to date over 15,000 storm drains adopted Twin Cities and 652 in Washington County. This is kind of fun. These photos here I share because Julie Comfort is a teacher at O.H. Anderson Elementary School in Matamidi, and she actually assigned her kids to adopt a drain as part of their schoolwork. And so the kids and the families, they went out and they adopted a drain. And you can actually see that when you look at the stats, there's, a big cluster of people in Matamidi who have adopted drains, and then not as many as in the communities around there. There are some parts of the county where we haven't seen as many adoptions. So for example, I'm going to talk to Jessica a little later this morning. There haven't been as many adoptions in Forest Lake. So I got some door hangers fabricated. I'm going to see about trying to promote the program a little more in some of those neighborhoods where it's not getting out there as well.
And Angie, can I ask a question?
Beth, yes.
So the teacher, Julie Comfort, assigned this to her students.
Yeah.
Are we seeing so we saw an uptick in adoptions from her students, right?
Yeah.
Continuing, are they sticking with it? Are they continuing to adopt? Are they continuing to to clean them up and report? you know, how does that continue? What are we seeing and how that
Yeah, you know, that's a great question because she just did this in the past school year. So it was the 2020 to 2021 school year that she did this for. So I think it's a little early yet to know if they keep taking care of their storm drains into the following years when they're not in her class anymore. But it's something to keep an eye on. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It would be something good to watch because, you know, if they continue and they have this great track record, close to or even above what our, you know, traditional adoptees do, then this may be a model we can repeat. But if we see,
if you see them just doing it for the 1 year that they're in the class and then they kind of stop taking care of them, I mean, it's still a benefit, but not as much of a benefit.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess I don't know the answer to the question yet since it's still relatively new that she's been doing this, but I thought it was cool. And I didn't even know she was doing it until Adopt a Drain through Hamline University featured her in one of their Instagram stories. And I saw it on Instagram and I was like, hey, that's in my county. How did I not know that she was doing that? So that was kind of funny. I just think it's funny when, you know, you learn about your own programs on social media. In terms of volunteer engagement, I do want to, you know, make note of the fact that we have a lot of volunteers who we have trained in the past 5 years or so in various capacities. We have about 20 master water stewards that got trained through the freshwater program, another 3 that are in training right now. And we have a number of volunteers that also got trained through the AIS detectors program at the University of Minnesota. And I mention this because, you know, there's only so much that I can do as one person, or, you know, even having Barbara now, there's only so much that the 2 of us can do as 2 people when we're talking about a huge geographical area like we are. So these volunteers have really been helping to just kind of spread the impact of our outreach. And not always in the way that I hoped or envisioned it happening. You know, like I had hoped, well, they're going to get trained and they're going to help me to make my job easier. You know, like they'll staff events for me, or they'll, you know, they'll do things that normally I would do. And what more so seems to happen is they get excited about doing things on their own. So they come up with their own ideas of things they want to do in their neighborhood, in their community, which is also a good thing. It's, you know, it doesn't make my life easier, but it does, you know, it does have a nice impact. So, for example, in Square Lake, there are a couple of people in the Square Lake Association who have attended the AIS detectors program. And then they, you know, asked me to order a whole bunch of the AIS detectors booklets. And they're talking about putting on their own training now where they're going to train one another on how to recognize aquatic invasive species in the lake. And Lake de Montreville and Olson, they are hosting an event tomorrow night. And they are inviting all of the people who are in the Lake de Montreville Olson Association and all of the neighbors in their area. And everybody's coming over to somebody's house. And then I'm going to be there, and somebody from St. Croix River Association is going to be there and talking about shoreline landscaping and aquatic invasive species and things like that. Sustainable Stillwater is a community group that got started 7 or 8 years ago. And they've been really active too in helping to promote the Adopt a Drain program in Stillwater. So proportionately, there are many more drains adopted in Stillwater than in other larger cities in the county. And I would attribute that mostly to Sustainable Stillwater being out there and promoting that program a lot. And of course, Mike Eisensee will want people to know that they're using volunteers to plant a lot of the new stormwater features that were installed up in Marina and St. Croix, and continuing to look for volunteers for the remaining planting projects that they have scheduled for this summer. So this is where I will kind of stop talking and maybe move into us having a conversation about what expansion might look like as we are adding in new funding for the northern portion of the Lower St. Croix watershed. So I wanted to show you first for perspective, the current area on your right that EMWREP covers is all of Washington County, plus this little portion of Chisago County that's in the Comfort Lake Forest Lake watershed. And then, you know, a little bit of Ramsey County that's in Valley Branch and Ramsey, Washington Metro watershed districts. But for the most part, we've been pretty Washington County centric since we've started. And now the area that is covered by the new Lower St. Croix One Watershed One plan is in that picture in the middle, the blue outline. So it's about 2/3 of Washington County, the portion that goes into the St. Croix River, and then almost all of Chisago County and a few, you know, corners of Pine County, Isanti, Anoka County. So that's just to give you an idea of what the geographical difference is between the two areas. So there's a lot of overlap between them, but obviously EMWREP also includes, you know, a sizable portion of Washington County that goes to the Mississippi River. And the Lower St. Croix area obviously includes, you know, quite a bit of the northern region that we haven't been doing any outreach in up until now. So in terms of what kind of funding is coming in through the One Watershed One plan, there is $1.2 million spread out over the next 2 years that's going towards a whole variety of things happening just in the Lower St. Croix watershed. So outreach and conservation projects with farmers is by and far, you know, the bulk of the funding going toward that goal. Public education, stormwater reduction in urban areas, restoring wetlands, doing some street sweeping analyses and targeted street sweeping implementation in cities is another goal, protecting shoreline buffers and doing just many more sub-watershed analyses. So that's kind of where the funding is coming from. And what I'm looking at in terms of what are we doing currently with EMWREP and what kinds of things are being funded through Lower St. Croix. Through EMWREP, traditionally, we have done stormwater education. We've done Blue Thumb Planting for Clean Water. That's talking about native gardens, rain gardens, shoreline plantings. We provide outreach support for partners, programs and plans, volunteer engagement, a lot of just networking to have education partnerships, media communications. And then we've also done Stormwater U and NEMO kind of technical trainings for like city staff, city council people, county commissioners, folks like that. For the past at least 7 or 8 years, we've been getting an additional little chunk of money from the county to go towards groundwater education and aquatic invasive species education. So we're doing that, you know, above and beyond what we would normally be doing for EMWREP. With Lower St. Croix, like I said, it's happening in the same geographical area a lot of times, but there is a focus on education and outreach to farmers and rural landowners in particular. There will be an agronomist hired in the near future. And so part of the goal of the new education funds is to support that position. Do more support for landscape stewardship planning, more outreach to shoreline property owners, and, you know, especially up in those northern regions where there hasn't been education and outreach programming in the past. More NEMO and NIDS for local decision makers. And once again, especially in the northern areas where they have not yet updated their stormwater ordinances. And, you know, just kind of continuing to build those watershed education partnerships, especially in the northern area. All right, do I hear somebody wanting to pop in, or is that just?
I came in.
Oh, that's Sage. Hi, Sage.
Yeah, hi.
So I'm going to, what am I going to do? I'm going to back up.
Angie?
Yes, I'm going to back up to here and maybe stop sharing so that I could let Jay pop in a moment. And
Yeah,
talk
I
about
just
some options.
want to point out just the one thing that kind of, I don't know, creates a great opportunity or complicates things a little bit, is just to remind folks that the 50% of Barbara's position for the Lower St. Croix is for the entire basin. And so there's, you know, 2/3 to 3/4 of Washington County that's getting additional education services through the funding from the state through the Lower St. Croix. And so she's doing those educational activities in Washington County and in the rest of the basin. And that currently EMWREP is just for Washington County, a little bit of Ramsey and a little bit of Chisago. And so what we're trying to do is to really help. Really, it's about helping Barbara with her timesheet. So it's really clear what she's doing gets billed to what. And so it really makes it easy for us to track the distinction between those activities. So we have that 50% EMWREP, 50% Lower St. Croix that we're really trying to be careful about tracking and making distinction between those activities. And one of the ways that we're thinking about doing that is being really clear about what things Barbara is doing as Lower St. Croix and what things Barbara's doing is just EMWREP. So we can keep track of the 50-50 split for her time and not have to say 75% of this one activity is one and 25% is other. So we want to avoid that as much as possible.
Yeah.
And we would really love some input and feedback from you as a group to help us make sure that we're, number one, you're cool about that distinction of tasks and activities and what's EMWREP, what's not EMWREP. For the time tracking and billing purposes. And then there's another discussion that Angie's going to have about, the expansion of EMWREP and how that might happen, because there are a number of other MS4 communities and other partners in the northern portion of the watershed who are interested in participating in that above and beyond what the Lower St. Croix potentially can do. And so that's another side conversation. And then once we start doing that, then how things might blur and how we might want to market it. But there's a lot of things kind of shifting and shuffling right now that we're trying to manage and make it as easy as possible for Barbara to manage her time and to make sure that all of our EMWREP partners are clear on what services they're getting for the funding that they're contributing for the program. And we're trying to be really sensitive to that. So that's my
So
little
before I go into, like what it might look like as we start to create a blended program, I just want to create a space. If anybody has any questions or input or just feedback on how things have been going so far over the past year or so in terms of EMWREP education outreach. Anything?
It's hard because there's so many different am I off mute now?
No, I can hear you.
There's so many priorities. So, I've been satisfied with a lot of the, material creation and just the dialogue and knowing that, you're representing multiple causes at, Orchard Partners and those kind of services. So I think as long as I feel like I'm kind of tracking where the goals are, I can tie into it in some way or another. That's the value that I'm getting from your services for our watershed and for our investment. Because things that you learn through your process of working with other areas kind of start to, fill in the gaps where they might be. It's just have to be more, interactive with you in order to learn what those are. And I know the more you have territory, the less it's hard to have those individual conversations, but we've been having those this year, especially as we've been dealing with equity and other kinds of things that happen through your time that have impact across the whole area if we actually start implementing things like that.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
This is Karen Kill with Browns Creek Watershed District. Just something I wanted to throw out, and maybe there's a better time somewhere in all of this to bring it up, but we're noticing a lot more infill development within Browns Creek Watershed District, more areas where we have smaller homeowner associations that are being put in charge of their stormwater management in their small developments, and a lot more potential for failure with only 15 households being required to be responsible for those features. I know we have some great MS4 toolbox toolkit, really more for the cities, but if there could be something that is created, either with you guys, or maybe if there's an upcoming grant to have maybe a student work on this specifically, but to create a toolkit specifically for homeowner associations. There is definitely, more of these that are on the landscape in the last 20 years for infiltration basins and wet ponds and HOAs that have no idea what they're supposed to be doing for checking annual inspections, and then, how much to be budgeting for these things and what would actually, if they needed to put out a proposal for someone else to do this, what would they ask for, sort of similar to what you've put together for irrigation or lawn care for HOAs, maybe there's something that if you have these kinds of features, here's what to ask for, I don't know, something along that lines, I think would be really beneficial.
I can see the value of that for us too in other contexts where it's a targeted audience, and the nuancing of how you communicate with them and get them on board and then have them not retract and regress in their designs. Like I've had examples of that in our watershed where they rip out what you've done because they have a changeover of staff or a changeover, and they're not holding to their contracts, so to speak, not the contractors that put it in, but the homeowners association that don't understand the purposes of the projects or the BMPs.
So Angie, if I could add something, I'm sorry, Brian, I saw you raise your hand.
No, go ahead. I'll finish after.
Okay. This has been a big issue in Rice Creek, and something that we've been grappling with for a couple of years. And one of the things that we did this year is we recruited a team of water stewards from an HOA. Their interest was specific to their HOA, but as we're kind of going through it, we're working with them to kind of create a template for how we work with these groups. What are the shared goals? Because their goals and objectives aren't always our goals and objectives. So how do we align those? And so that may be something that we could discuss kind of offline or in another meeting about, are there ways for us to collaborate with you guys and learn from you, but also share what we've learned and maybe develop something like this. I will tell you that I do like the model of having water stewards in an HOA. I don't know if you can have, every HOA is going to have a water steward, but having HOAs that are having water stewards that are committed not just to their HOA, but to helping us work with other HOAs, talking points, tools, articles, inspection and maintenance information, all of those things have been discussed and we're trying to work through. So.
I'd love to learn from what you guys are doing then.
And we had an example where we had a strong water steward, but the politics of who they'll listen to is really tricky. And so she got a whole huge project. We spent all this money. And then I saw that, wait a minute, you've taken your gutters down and you're directing in the opposite way of where they were, the big, huge rain garden that we installed and she was maintaining. You dropped her out of the role of helping maintain it. And all of a sudden they're off task, in terms of what they've just done. And so it's good to have some other examples of HOA projects that are, being done well and some models for that kind of interface.
Brian, yeah.
Okay, Karen brought up the associations and small groups and things, and one entry into that is water usage. I mean, if you look in the southern part of the district in Cottage Grove and Woodbury, water supply that is used for sprinklers and that kind of thing for lawn maintenance is a big deal. And what you find is, although there's a lot of programs for that, there's not a coordinated activity for water usage, and it may be your entry into that area, at least in the southern part of the watershed areas.
Yeah, and I don't know how many of you remember we had a grant project specifically to work with HOAs about 5 years ago, a green community grant through Bowser, and we had done focus groups with HOA board members, property management companies, and lawn care companies. And that was one of our big takeaways, is that people were most interested in things that would cut their water bills. So, anything having to do with water conservation, they were interested in, and things like rain gardens were a lot less interested in. They were, very much more interested in, irrigation audits, stormwater reuse, anything like that, that somehow reduced their water bills, because it was mostly, a money motivation, and not so much a improving habitat kind of motivation like a single family home might be.
This is Kristen from Woodbury. If I could just
Yeah.
add too.
Yeah, you do a lot of work with HOAs, so.
Yeah, so we have, our program is in its 5th year. We have a cost share program for HOAs and commercial properties. Anybody that's irrigated, or their irrigation runs through a separate meter, so not through like a single family home meter, that we cost share 50% of the cost, up to $8,000 per site. So we've had around 63 properties utilize that program so far, and it's going to sunset this year, but we're definitely talking about if there's any way we can kind of capitalize on it, or if there's specific targets that we should be reaching out to, just because we've seen like right away people are really interested, and then of course it kind of dies down. But I still think it's been a successful program that we've been able to do. That,
are you saying it's sunsetting because of funding, or because of saturation of the market, or what's sunsetting in the program? Time?
It's really, yeah, it's just sunsetting because council approved it for 5 years up front. We could propose and have maybe council consider adding it. So sunsetting budget wise, like our 5-year CIP plan included funding for this program for 5 years, and then not after that. But we found that we did a pilot 2 years previously, and found that just leveraging some additional money and having them kind of come to us and tell them what they need, and that we'll just share the upfront cost, knowing that the end result is going to be decreased water bills, as Angie was saying, was a pretty good sell, I think, while it lasted.
I think you did a great job with that program, and we looked up to you in that.
Yeah.
Quite a bit.
Karen, do you have another question or thought?
Yeah, one other big one, looking at the lists that the MPCA has just gone through, the St. Croix watershed, and there's, later this week going to be a meeting about all of the new potential impairment and potential delistings. Here in Browns Creek Watershed District, and I imagine many others, are starting to see some chloride impairments. Yep. For instance, Long Lake and Stillwater, which has a lot of commercial drainage, is potentially going to be listed for chlorides. And, I'm really looking at potential, education outreach is going to be a major tool that we're going to have for holding those chloride impairments and reducing that into the future. Obviously, legislation has not yet been passed to reduce liability, and that's going to be a huge factor in addressing a lot of this with commercial properties. But how can we have some outreach? I still feel like it's not going to help Long Lake because it's all on sanitary sewer, but we still have water softeners as a major use, and we have very hard water in this area, where there could be some cost share programs in regards to I have a 7-year-old house, and I have no idea if it's programmed properly. I don't even know how to figure out if it's programmed properly. We're doing what the builder told us to do 7 years ago blindly. How does one kind of figure out are there, even just for some education outreach aspects, it seems like such a low hanging fruit to reduce salt use in that way. But obviously we're already doing some aspects for salting for just, your own driveway and yard, sidewalk, but how do we reach those parking lots? And
we have, we've had this gap in funding now because of the Fortin Consulting no longer having the EPA grants, so that we could partner with the training programs to have a reduced cost on all of that. But it does seem like the MPCA is definitely looking at the water softener more closely, and that's starting to emerge as a topic that is on the table for how we're going to work on that level. But it is a kind of a weird game because a lot of people have been, on like city government and maybe county government staff have been trained already. They've gone through these trainings, but now how are we upping the ante about how we cut down the chloride use?
Yeah. Barbara, do you want to tell them about your research into that?
Ironically, this is something that I've been working on in the last week and a half specifically. And there is an emerging suite of resources, so to speak, that are coming forth. But Karen, I completely agree. Like, I'm in the same boat as you. We have a water softener, trying to really understand how it works, where that water goes, how it's treated, untreated, people who have their own septic systems, how to deal with their potential use. And so I have a conversation scheduled later this week with somebody at the MPCA. And just to make sure that I'm kind of starting to get a better handle on some of the options that are available for people in terms of just, so I haven't really started doing any social media yet, but this is kind of where I was thinking, like, what if we created just like a couple simple videos of like, here's me, here's my water softener. These are the things I'm thinking about, and this is why I should be thinking about them.
Yeah.
But I participated in Waterfest on Saturday in St. Paul, talking a lot about groundwater. And I actually had a couple people ask me about chloride pollution. And so I feel like it's also it's starting to emerge in the public's conscious beyond just being about road salt and winter conditions. There's also like, we still are having this issue and there's other things contributing to it. So,
Barbara, who are you talking to at the MPCA when you're meeting? Who are you meeting with at the MPCA?
Brooke, oh goodness,
Brooke Asselson.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
I mean, that's definitely been emerging as a topic that's because we've had, working groups on chloride for many years, and really gradually each topic is coming to the forefront. So I'm glad that you're having that conversation.
Angie, hey, I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
So Angie or whoever, so if somebody can just give me a ballpark number of if there's X amount of chloride or salt pollution that you folks are talking about, where is the largest percentage coming from?
That I don't know off the top of my head, but that's one of the things I was hoping to talk about with Brooke.
Okay, so
there's a really good report from the MPCA summarizing a lot of that information that we've gotten. I use as a resource. They've got a handbook on it. I think we can.
Well, I'm just curious as to so my question is, where is it? Presumably it's road salt. I'm just speculating. Yeah. Let's just say it is. So from our city's perspective, we do try to use a blend of salt and sand. However, I want you folks to understand this. There's two prongs that are not going to have cities move away from salt anytime soon. Number one, the liability of not using salt. So until that liability is removed, that cities are going to continue to use it. And number two, make sure you all understand that we get just as many complaints about sand depositing on driveways and tracking in homes and yards and grasses that we aren't going to pay to clean up. We can't. So until both of those are addressed, this is all window dressing. So just keep those two items in mind as we think about.
We've had this, I want to just say we've had this on our minds for 10 or 15 years as educators. We've been working, and so it's kind of a strategizing thing. But I'm feeling, with the support teams at the place where Barbara used to work, they're starting to really zero in, and some of the watershed partners speeches and talks have helped us really look at, how we're going to be able to cut this down slowly but surely. And it is a combination of public education, but also activism on the part of, cities and communities to understand really how we're going to resolve this problem.
I think there's a good understanding of it. However, as your educational and outreach goes, if you do want to transition to the non-salt use, so to speak, into a more sand use, that
we're not going that way. We're not going.
Hold on, just let me finish.
I'm sorry. So we're not going there.
if there's a desire to use sand or something as alternatives, there are
Mhm.
consequences to those things. And
Yeah.
if, which is fine, and I think it's a great idea, because a lot of those complaints seem petty, but nevertheless, they're time consuming. And so, and so when, as part of the outreach, if that message can be, yes, your city can transition to these other materials, but there are things that you can do to help clean that up in the spring.
Yeah.
And don't expect us to run the street sweeper up and down your street 15 times, because we can't afford that.
Yeah.
I think
Brian, I
that
know
there's
you've
a
had
lot
your
of
hand up
study
for a
on
while.
that. There's a lot of study though on the street sweeping that it's getting to become obvious that that would be the cheaper method than ultimately other methods. But I think that's still being worked through the system for people to understand how we could work together on that. I mean, because that is a sign of the future. I think, you know, if you follow some of the Stantec and the other people who are doing the research on that kind of approach to cutting back on our salt use, or at least alleviating what we are using.
Alleviating the impact of what we are using. Brian, sorry, I kept saying your hand up for a while.
Yeah, I was going to remind Barb that when she's doing her evaluation, do not forget the manufacturers of the things. I know Connecticut and some of these other people would be absolutely jumping up and down happy if you include them in this, because it gives them a chance to, if you will, emphasize some of their newer units and devices in order to reduce salt usage with the water softeners. And that's before we got ourselves off on the street thing,
Yeah.
which I think is a separate issue and frankly not appropriate for that part of the discussion.
Mike Eisensee, are you wanting to jump in too? Is that why you appeared?
Yeah, so two items. Number one, back to the original question, was I'm really supportive and excited that EMWREP is expanding, especially since we have in our district, we have quite a bit of agricultural lands, and the collaboration between the agronomist and the education program, I think, is going to make a significant change in water quality, especially on the St. Croix in our area. Then the second follow-up piece that I kind of had my one insert for this meeting was that we're seeing a lot of landowner transition and a lot of enforcement or after the fact permitting issues for new landowners coming in. And I know we've talked about the new homeowner packet in the past, but it's really a high priority for us right now, just because it's consuming so much of our resources following up after the fact, as well as upsetting a lot of landowners who don't know that there are either easements or rules or restrictions on what they can and can't do on their new properties. So I appreciate that. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good reminder. And I know that there are other watersheds who have been talking about that being a high priority issue for them too right now, the land turnover and permitting issues. Okay. So yes, chlorides are definitely on the radar, definitely an issue that we are educating and will continue to be educating on. We are planning on doing one of the Fortin workshops this fall in partnership with Dakota County. So we do have at least one that's scheduled, and then are, working on developing some messaging, like Barbara said, around water softeners in particular, because that's kind of a new frontier that we haven't done any messaging on up until now. So I know that she has a draft article put together, and that's something that, could also content be tweaked for mailings or social media messaging or videos or things like that, like she's saying. Beth, yeah.
So moving away from kind of chlorides and salt,
yeah,
kind of the expansion, just kind of with the agriculture. I know one of the things that we've worked with you guys have been very helpful with Rice Creek in some of our initiatives to try to reach out to ag producers. And we actually just got an ag producer who's certified through the water quality program, a Washington County resident, sitting on our citizen advisory committee. So we're super excited about that. But one of the things that we're finding is that there are a lot of property owners that have like a 1 to 9 acre properties that aren't actually considered ag. And so, that's kind of becoming a priority for us as well. And so it would be nice to see, as we're working through, developing a more robust ag program with Barbara, are there ways that some of that can transfer to those 1 to 9 acre properties? And I would encourage Barbara to talk to Emily Johnson at the Anoka Collaborative, because they've done some programming. Okay, thumbs up. All right, great.
Yeah, we're actually, I can talk about it in a moment, but we are meeting with her on Thursday. So
perfect. Because that was my other thing, is when I look at, kind of your new map, like we have had EMWREP in Washington County. Anoka recently developed the Anoka Water Resource Outreach Collaborative and really followed the EMWREP model. So, when you're doing work in Anoka, I would like, since we've got a little bit of money going both places, it'd be great, keep that efficiency going.
Yeah, so what we are talking about with her on Thursday, we have a little bit of extra funds above and beyond what's paying for Barbara and I, and we would like to contract with Anoka SWCD to buy about 200 hours of Emily's time, because she has, like you said, already been doing much of this work in Anoka. There's, this geographical overlap, and she's got a lot of relationships established already. And so we're looking at how can we operate as a team instead of, Angie's doing outreach in Washington and Barbara's doing outreach in Chisago and Emily's doing outreach in Anoka. How can we kind of function as a team and share our knowledge base and our relationships and, really make it more like a holistic program? That's my goal, at least.
Music to my ears.
Yes, music. So maybe I just want to take a step back to talk about what it might look like as we, think about having something that's more of a blended program. I have a strong personal preference for having this be a holistic regional program, as opposed to having a EMWREP program and a Lower St. Croix program coexisting in the same area. To me, that's confusing both for us internally, but I think it's also really confusing for the public. So I have a strong personal preference for us just thinking of this as a, as a regional education, public education program. And, I don't want to freak anybody out with the idea of changing names, but I had even thought to myself, well, maybe instead of being called the East Metro Water Education Program, maybe we're called like, the Croy-Sippy Water Education Program, because we're the region draining to, the St. Croix and the Mississippi, or, maybe something that is, a little bit more public facing and inclusive. But at the same time, I did want to make note of the fact that there are EMWREP partners that are specifically, paying in order to meet their MS4 stormwater education requirements and get that extra individual support. So I think for, in the northern region, we wouldn't be doing that level of individual support or that kind of, MS4 stormwater education for people unless they also became paying partners. And that's something we had talked about as early as last summer, that, if the city of North Branch wants to join and they want to contribute at the same level as the city of Lake Elmo, then that's great. And then we can, include them in getting all of our MS4 materials to be able to share with the public. But otherwise we would just be doing that base level of general outreach and general rural landowner outreach in the northern areas, and not really that like very, very intense individual support unless they're, giving extra funds to be able to support that, just to keep things equitable and fair also. Thoughts from anyone? Did we lose Jay, or is Jay still here?
Jay's still here.
Jay is still here.
I want to make sure that we're.
I
was just going to say, I want to make, we've had this conversation, a little bit of this before, not necessarily about the renaming part, but, and Christina, talked about wanting to make sure that there was some fairness, that the, if we had partners, and outside of Washington County that are participating or benefiting from this, that they become paying partners, just like the EMWREP partners. And so that's something I completely agree with. And I think that's a great idea. And we have some options to consider for doing that.
Yeah, Brian.
Well, I guess, South Washington Watershed District joined this group, I think from the beginning. I think
Yes, you were one of the original 6.
And we did it because of the MS4 permits and the efficiency of having one group that covers, the efficiency of having a single entity that does it all. I don't want to lose that by any stretch of the imagination. I am not married to the EMWREP name, but I am married to the MS4 services that are required. So I guess I would entertain name changes, but I think it needs a lot more thought than just throwing something out and dealt with it in that fashion. I frankly think it's a topic for something we can bring up in the future. And with some better suggestions and maybe some brainstorming and things like that. But the rest of the story is we need to be very careful not to lose our focus on what are the goals in certain areas. That needs to not be lost.
Yeah. Christina, did you want to jump in? I saw you.
I feel like I should, right? Since
yeah, I know. I saw you come on, so I thought maybe you wanted to.
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, I've said that in the past that, there seems to be some inequities with some of the cities paying and some not. I like the idea of a name change, but maybe we need to test this out to make sure it's going to stay before we change that. Sure. I don't know that state fund will be around forever. And so, that will get to that question of how do we sustain this long term, and maybe that will be when the name change makes more sense. I just don't want to jump too fast to change something, and then in a couple of years maybe it goes away when the state funding goes away. So
yeah, well, and to some degree I don't really think that the name is that important, because I've not spent very much energy promoting EMWREP as a thing. In all of our educational materials, it's either blue thumb, like here's what you can do, or else it's something that's just kind of general and we're putting the individual city or watershed logo on it so that everybody can, use the same resources and call them their own. So I've fairly intentionally not ever marketed EMWREP or, East Metro Water Education Program to the public. But it was just something that struck me like, if we start to be doing education in a larger geographical area, would it make sense to eventually change?
I think it would be interesting too, to make sure that, as we're talking about this, that we really are clear about which educational activities are really MS4 focused and helping a community meet their MS4 requirements. Like our general education definitely it does tend to have an MS4 focus. Our community outreach and emo-like things are MS4. Blue Thumb definitely was MS4. The MS4 toolkit, MS4. So I think that's where, if we start really being conscious, because the EMWREP plan, and I think that's the way that we kind of create this umbrella and understanding and clarification is through the education plan. And that we have the 5 or 6 primary activities that are MS4 focused are EMWREP, and then maybe think about non-MS4 training activities be more the Lower St. Croix Basin scale sort of things. Or maybe we can add some clarity that way to make sure that we're clearly achieving our MS4 program goals for all the partners who initially, that's the whole foundation for this program was MS4. And that, then we look at the Lower St. Croix plan and identify those activities that are in there that aren't necessarily just MS4 related. Because Chisago County is not an MS4.
No, and that's why, when I was showing kind of the breakout that I see it right now, I will back us along here. Nope, here we go. So where I see, you know, the big addition coming from the Lower St. Croix funding is that education and outreach to the farmers and rural landowners. And we have been doing a little of it, but it's always been a, you know, lower tier, lower priority activity because, you know, the primary thing we were focusing on was that stormwater education. So, you know, that would be a big focus. And then there is a big chunk of funds in there for specifically working with communities on updating their ordinances, shoreline ordinances and stormwater ordinances.
Well, there's quite a few things potentially. I mean, like Beth was saying, you know, expanded programs for rural landowners would be an important one. And then also the work with lake associations.
Yes, lake associations. Yep, outreach to shoreline property owners. Yep.
Exactly. So it's not just, it's not just shoreline property owners. It really is about the lake, you know, coordinating lake associations and helping motivate a lot more interest in lake protection. And a lot of those areas aren't MS4s. So what does the group think about kind of distinguishing things this way and being really clear about what's labeled as an MS4 activity and what's not, to try to make that distinction between what's an EMWREP activity and what is a Lower St. Croix activity? And then we can talk about that, how we market and you know, create more of a team-based approach to how we actually implement these activities. Because I saw that Eric commented on Brian's comment, and I want to make sure that what we're talking about here addresses your MS4 education outreach goals.
Yeah, Brian.
I'm agreeing with what Jay said, is let's use that slide that you've created as our basis for now. That may help Barb with her separation of duties, at least for now. I guess I'm going back and saying this is a moving target. And I think we should review that on an ongoing basis. I don't know if that's a yearly thing or some other more often than that, but at least a yearly review, and keep track on percentages of time and things like that, so that we have we need more data is what I'm trying to say. And I really like the idea of making sure that we are very clear what is MS4 and what is, I'm going to call it, other activities, because there's some crossover, but then there's some unique things that are related to this. And, you know, we need to look at each one of those. And it may be that some of those things, I'm thinking shoreline and lake associations may have a crossover in percentages. And you may need to really work that into your thing that's saying this is 30% MS4 and it's, you know, 70% something else. But I would encourage you to collect data based on what you're doing. Start with what you have in your chart. That's my comment.
Sure. Yeah. And I know one thing that Jay and I talked about that was useful for me is thinking about this, like new funds coming from Lower St. Croix, similar to the way we've gotten special purpose grants in the past. So for example, we had a 3-year grant to recruit and train 20 master water stewards. So that was additional funding that we brought in from Bowser specifically to do that kind of project. And it allowed us to do work above and beyond what we were doing through EMWREP funding. And I'm kind of thinking of the Lower St. Croix funds that way too. Like, we're going to keep doing everything we're doing through EMWREP, but we have this additional pot of money now that allows us to do, you know, these new activities above and beyond what we're already doing. And have Barbara. So we have, before we hang up in 10 minutes, we
Angie,
have,
oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I just put something in the chat too. And you know, I just want to kind of, when we're working with HOAs and things like that, what we develop and learn there may have a lot of applicability for other groups. So like, working with lake associations, we may learn a lot of those same lessons for finding the shared goals and how we communicate with lake associations may be the same as how we're, maybe different content, but a lot of the methodologies will be, so we, maybe we can find a kind of a rhythm in working in those arenas that have crossover.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I know we do. There's a lot of crossover. I mean, that's the thing about education is things don't stay in their silos very well. There's a lot of crossover in all of these programs and activities that we do. And the good thing is that we're also all really good at working in partnership and working with one another as it is. So, we're sharing things through Watershed Partners and we're sharing things through Blue Thumb Partnership. And, we've got a lot of these great networks that we're already, learning from one another. I don't want to run out of time to talk about the next contract because we do have to have a new 3-year contract for EMWREP. And I know Jay had put together some potential scenarios. I don't know if you wanted to talk about that, Jay, with the group.
I think at this point, I'd like to just talk number one about moving forward with EMWREP, and we are at a contract cycle, as you know, 3-year contract cycle, and we're up for renewing. And the only significant changes that I'm planning on right now or proposing is that we address the increase in costs of the program. And in the past, we've averaged out the 3% approximately increase per year and just average that into one number. So your boards could approve a 3-year agreement with one number. So what I did is I prepared just a proposed numbers with the 3%, then we can easily just average that out. I wanted to show everybody the numbers. And then if we did expand EMWREP to be a larger scale MS4-ish type activity, then what we would propose to other partners to contribute based on their following the similar formula that we have for tax capacity, but also recognizing that a lot of the communities within the Lower St. Croix are not wholly within the land area, so it's approximating what portion of their area is actually within the Lower St. Croix if we're going to expand that route. So it would be following a similar formula that we have. So for EMWREP, for example, for if Chisago wanted to participate, it would be at the same level as a small county, and then if Anoka wanted to participate, it would be the same level as Washington County, but it would be what portion of Anoka's within the actual basin. And that could be in kind as well. So that's something we would talk to Anoka SWCD about, for example, and what amount of time we might be able to count as match for Emily's time within those activities, or actually send some funding their way to help have Emily help with that program.
Quick question. How soon? I have to have my budget in next week for next year. How soon do you think you'll have some numbers to us?
We have the numbers now for just expanding EMWREP with the current level of partnership.
Okay.
So Angie has those.
Great.
I have them because Jay put them together. Brian, yeah.
Well, I guess for new people coming in, I'd consider also a buy-in, an upfront fee to bring them in. Simply because, I mean, we do have a certain amount of investment in you, Angie, and now in Barbara. And frankly, we're diluting that. And so if someone wants to come in now at a later date, I'm suggesting some kind of a buy-in fee for that. So consider that when you're going through your new people that are coming in.
Sure. Okay.
Your goal, it wouldn't be diluting it, Brian. So that would be something you want to make sure isn't happening as a byproduct of this. And then also just to throw out, we haven't had any other partners have to do any sort of buy-in. So we've had, like Oakdale began participating many years after everybody else, and there was no additional charge to them for beginning to participate. So just something to think about.
I think our main hope in having some of the northern partners buy-in would actually be to get us more money, because, you know, if we're right now we're getting funds from Lower St. Croix for, you know, education happening in Chisago County, but that doesn't necessarily get money for materials expenses, printing out flyers, all those kinds of things. And so if Chisago puts in an extra amount of funding per year, then that creates more of a materials budget, or even more time to contract with, you know, contractors or for graphic design, or, you know, bulk up our Emily hours, or, you know, somebody like Emily, or maybe even have a summer seasonal, something like that during the summer when we're having lots of events happening.
And also to address the fact that our costs have gone up a lot more than 3% a year, because we wanted to make sure that Angie stays. And so there have been some adjustments to the costs that have gone more than just that 3%. And then also bringing in higher end educator like Barbara. So the costs for the program have gone up more than just that 3% per year. So we're trying to figure out ways to offset those additional costs without increasing you know, cost to our existing partners substantially. So that's part of our thought process as well. And so, I mean, our actual cost for EMWREP for 1.5 FTEs is almost 200 grand right now. So that's just the reality of it.
So next steps, since we are getting close to 11:30, I can go ahead and send out, Jay, you and I can just touch base and make sure like we have good numbers for a next 3-year EMWREP contract.
For the existing EMWREP partners, we can average out that 3% increase per year if that's what the group would like. And then we can send that out right away and have revised numbers, and draft agreements would be very similar to what we did the last round. I don't think we'd have there's any actual language change in the agreement itself.
The only thing would be if we wanted to change the language that right now it says a partner must be wholly or partially within Washington County. So if we wanted to change that to allow the opportunity for another entity to join, then that would slightly change the contract language.
So is anybody opposed to slightly?
Yes, that's what I was just about to ask, if there's any opposition to doing that.
Exactly. So if we change the language slightly to allow for other partners to join EMWREP, is anybody opposed to that?
One concern I had is, I don't know if it's a good idea, bad idea, but when we say other partners, would those only be public, or would those potentially be private, nonprofit?
No, only public.
Only public, really focused on MS4.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any that are sort of potentially knocking at your door about that?
Chisago Lake Improvement District would very much like to join the partnership. And in fact, Jerry Spetzman has wanted to since 12 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So they very much want to join.
Let him in.
Yeah. He's been begging.
City of Wyoming is an MS4.
Yeah, City of Wyoming, the Chisago Lake Improvement District, and potentially either Chisago County or Chisago SWCD. Not sure if they both would, or if it would just be one or the other.
Rush City potentially.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, Brian?
But those are the only ones that I'm predicting joining.
If we just change that to East Metro, would that cover all of the areas, or we need to be something broader than that? I'm just asking that question because that may be an easy change.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty easy change. In fact, I think we have a draft version we had put together in January where I don't remember exactly what we changed, but it was just, we did a find and replace everywhere that it said, Washington County only, and it had some kind of more generic language.
A minor enough change that Smith partners might not notice it.
Ha ha ha.
Well, I like the East Metro is enough. It's pretty broad, and it allows us to see our bigger picture of who we all are.
Yep.
Together as a team.
Yeah, I'm not proposing we change the name of the program to the I-94-35 corridor education program.
Gross.
Although that's kind of what's happening.
Let's keep their eyes on who we really are.
Yeah. Okay. So everybody's feeling good, and we'll follow up with a contract, because I know that I'm sure Rice Creek is not the only one who's doing budgeting right now. So we're kind of trying to get that ready in time for everyone for your budget cycles.
That's good.
Okay.
Excellent.
You know my email, you know my phone number, so you can always get a hold of me. And, you know, I know that several of you, I have one-on-one follow-up meetings with scheduled sometime this week. So I'll be talking with more of you soon. Yeah. Anything else? No? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Congrats, Angie, for 15 years.
Yeah.
The cat I'm gonna have a cat party. I'm gonna have a cat party. All right. Bye.